This podcast is brought to you by Casa de la Zissa and by Again and Forever.
The Final Frontier podcast. These are the voyages of Jake Boger and Justin Spur. Our weekly mission to explore memories of Star Trek's strange new worlds, to recall the search for new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has had the spare time to go before. Alrighty, well, welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Final Frontier. Today, your head's gonna hurt because we're talking about, yeah, like what I did there, because we're talking about Dagger of the Mind, which we're getting away from the silly in this week. It's a little silly because we're gonna make it silly, but I mean it's not as silly as like a Mud's Women, for example.
Oh no, no,
So
but it does get a little. I would say it's about as silly as the Android one. Because that's the logic went there for me. Some of the
yeah,
logic on this went there for me.
yeah, but you remember this is 1960 psychology. So,
That's gonna be that's a big question for me.
alrighty.
Um,
Well, buckle up,
so
everybody, because it's time to visit the Plane-arium.
the Plane-arium. Oh yeah, that's where this totally comes from. Oh my god,
Oh,
I
trust me,
knew I recognized this.
there's gonna be a whole section on that here coming. But of course, like I said, talking about Star Trek Season 1, Episode 9, technically, Dagger of the Mind. Well, actually, let's first, because I like this format better. Would you please grace us with the Paramount Plus synopsis for this episode?
Oh, of course. So naturally, this one's very concise. Okay, so it just says that Kirk investigates. So obviously, my first question is Kirk going at this solo? To which the answer is yes, yes, he is. And then will this, because of the name, it was they go to a prisoner or jail experiment. So I was like, is this going to be about prisoner ethics? Which it's not. It's not. There's multiple times where I thought it was going to be about, especially when they introduced the beginning that it's a penal colony. Although they can't decide if it's
Yeah.
a psychiatric hospital or a
Well,
penal colony.
it's a
Two different
penal
things.
it's a penal colony for the criminally insane.
So both?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's Arkham
Yeah.
Asylum is technically not a prison, for
True.
example.
Everyone treats it. Funny. I saw someone. I think it was a TikTok where someone was like, How come everyone always breaks out of Arkham? Isn't it a more secure prison? And it's like, well, no, Arkham's not actually a prison; it's a psychiatric hospital. But a
It
lot
is
of that is a
it is
question I had for
maximum.
later.
So this episode takes place between star dates 2715.1 and 2715.2, which I actually think that's wrong, because this takes place over at least 2 days, and
Yes, yes, it does.
I think that timeline is not long enough, but there's another discrepancy with the star dates, which I'll get into in a second. We're still in the year 2266 with our intrepid crew, and the original air date for this episode was November 3rd, 1966. Written by Shimon Winselberg and directed by, again, Vincent McEvity, which that should sound familiar. McEvity. The name should sound familiar because I believe he directed he directed Miri, the last episode.
That makes sense.
Ah, yeah. And there's some similarities, but so the star dates, this does not make sense because if you recall in the previous episode, aforementioned Miri, that took place between star dates 2713.5 to 2717.3. So if we're going by time logic, what's happening in this episode happens while Kirk is on the planet in
Huh.
Miri.
Huh. Oops. Someone wasn't paying attention.
Oops. Well, they hadn't really. Star dates were arbitrary at this
I
point.
was just gonna
Although,
say
they had been
Because
making somewhat sense up until this point, but
yeah, they're like no one's paying attention to the star dates.
yeah. So the title of this episode is taken from a line in William Shakespeare's Macbeth.
I knew.
Macbeth.
Okay,
Yeah,
that was a
you're a
question I
Shakespeare
had. I was
guy.
like,
You're a Shakespeare
yeah,
guy, so
I recognized the dagger of the mind. I specifically studied Macbeth in high school, so that's one of the ones I remember from high school, and I was like dagger of the mind, and so that was one of my notes for later. Is that a reference to Star Trek or to Star Trek? To
yes,
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare was like, I predict that many, many centuries in the future there will be this thing called television. It'll be like a
And
play, but you can watch over and over again.
hey, but
Um,
like you know what? If Shakespeare existed today, he'd probably be a television writer
he'd
because
so be
his
a television writer.
like low budget or an indie film director because his within the context of his time, his shit was very low budget. I know they have that era of being for hooty tooty snooty folks, but they
Not
really weren't.
really.
They were for poor
That's
people.
Shakespeare is hoity-toity now, which is ironic because, as we know, Shakespeare is big in every Star Trek series, at least those that I have seen. And it's like
Yeah.
everybody who serves on a starship is like a Shakespeare nerd, and it's kind of like these were actually really at the time, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Shakespeare's plays initially were very, very for the masses. They were for
Oh yeah.
yeah, they were for the poor and the downtrodden, which is why they were
Yeah.
so funny and really didn't look kindly upon nobility.
Yeah. A lot of his stuff is like for the time highly controversial, but yeah, he saw theater and arts as for everybody, and so it's funny that the Globe
Was that
Theater, which is his theater,
yeah.
but that was like for the poor. It's like the poor people went to that theater. That was the whole idea.
Well, but didn't he come up with theater in the round with the logic of getting more seats?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
he
what I
did. Yeah.
thought. But specifically, this refers to a moment in Macbeth where Macbeth, the titular character, is preparing to murder Duncan, who is his cousin, correct?
Yeah.
I think so.
I
But
believe.
anyway,
Yeah.
he's preparing to murder Duncan, the King of Scotland, and he sees a dagger that he attempts to grasp, only to discover it is a figment of his imagination, which means this title really doesn't make any sense. But
I mean,
well, because everything that
elements of it
everybody,
are in people's imagination, I suppose.
well, no, because everybody who you think is crazy is actually sane in this episode.
True, but also they do implant like imaginary ideas
Okay,
into
fair,
people's
fair.
heads.
Okay, that's fair. But anyway, our story begins with the USS Enterprise making a supply run to the planet Tantalus 5, a colony where the criminally insane are confined for treatment. The facility's director is Dr. Tristan Adams, a psychiatrist famous for advocating more humane treatment of such patients. After the Enterprise delivers supplies and receives cargo from Tantalus, a man emerges from the container taken aboard and assaults a technician.
So, okay, I just have a number of questions about the preceding events that come from this man coming out of this box. I mean, first of all, my first note is that they had penal colonies because do we still have penal colonies in our modern day? I tried to Google it, but I couldn't find any like modern day other than like some I guess exist in Russia. But and then obviously yeah, there's a man in that there box. And did they not scan the box before bringing the box onto the ship? That not a
Yeah,
part of the
well, you
security
know
process?
that's logic there, good buddy. That's
Get that shit out of here. Get that logic shit out of here.
well, and the other thing. So I'm under the impression, and I could be wrong, but I think your transporter settings are different for inanimate objects versus like biological materials. So
That would make sense. Yeah,
if it's a box of supplies and that rings true, then this man would be dead,
you would imagine.
like
Yeah, and
super
then,
dead.
and then yeah, the guy who's fixing stuff and he sticks up behind him and he knocks him out. Is he just like completely deaf? He didn't hear him open the box, walk over it. Like, he didn't
That's
hear a thing.
that's my note. I said two people, which I guess one of them left, but we don't see him leave on screen. So two people are in the transporter room, and not one of them saw a crazy dude getting out of a box in the middle of the room. Not a
Yeah,
one.
getting out of a box and then knocking the guy out. Like he didn't not even didn't notice him out of the peripheral of his vision, but like didn't hear him moving. Like I would have heard him moving.
Right, and
I
then
don't got great hearing,
so my other thing was a description of the inmate you're missing, and who you know who he is, would be extremely helpful in an event like this.
right? Well, I
Um,
know, yeah, and then I've got a note that says, seriously, why didn't they scan the box? This seems like a major fuck up.
It's a huge fuck up. Like I said, this is another moment where, and a lot of these, which again, it's the 60s, it's a new kind of show. There's a lot of moments in these early episodes, especially where it's like a lot of these things are happening because the plot needs them to happen.
Pretty
Where
much, yeah.
this is a disciplined military-esque group on a ship in the middle of space. You're gonna want to know what's in the box.
What's in the box?
Yeah,
You
there's
know?
there's a lot of moments in this episode where characters do things that are dumb or just
Oh god, so many, so
too
many.
trusting.
So, but the other note I had is the first time we see our, well, who we think is a patient, but it's actually one of the doctors, but he's got the crazy eyes.
I said his eyes were real striking. Like that standout performance from our guest stars this week. Well,
Very, very much.
certainly
One of them.
our crazed doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. Kirk sounds super Republican when he's describing these penal colonies because he actually at one point says they're more like resorts now. And I'm just like,
I know. I've got a note about that. Where
like, wow, dude.
Kirk is just justifying penal colonies, which, like, oh, all right, that's a lot of justification. Yeah, he's got a real lax attitude towards the situation.
Reaching the bridge, the intruder demands asylum, but Spock subdues him with the Vulcan nerve pinch. In sickbay, the intruder identifies himself as Dr. Simon von Gelder, and a computer check reveals that he is not a patient, but Dr. Adams' assistant. When they inform Tantalus of von Gelder's capture, which I don't remember, do they pronounce it Van Gelder or von Gelder? I think they say Van Gelder.
Van Gelder.
Van Gelder.
Pretty sure it's Van Gelder.
When they inform Tantalus of Van Gelder's capture, Dr. Adams claims that Van Gelder's testing of an experimental treatment device on himself is responsible for his disturbed condition. McCoy, suspicious, urges Kirk to investigate. Kirk transports down to the colony with one of the ship's psychiatrists, Dr. Helen Noel. Oh, a lady!
Oh goodness, Dr. Helen. So okay, first few notes on that little chunk there. Spock has a little speech about how on Vulcan they don't have violent criminals because when you only have logic or there's no emotion, you don't have violent crime. Which, like, okay, so then does Vulcan just not have psychopaths or sociopaths?
Because that's demonstrably not true because Spock's half brother or brother.
You don't have a brother.
Technically, you are correct. I do not have a brother.
Hey, you see?
I have a half brother.
Yeah, I think his half brother.
I gotta sit down.
Who is conveniently not mentioned until Star Trek V, the movie, is expelled from Vulcan for being emotional. So
exactly. So I'm like, what Spock says is just blatantly untrue.
Well, it's also illogical if you think about it, because because the Vulcan discipline of logic is a learned behavior. They're not born with it. They go through various. So I mean, it just stands to reason that of a planet with at least a few billion people, I would imagine that there's at least a handful of psychopaths, you know?
Exactly. When the guy gets to the bridge, the silent communication amongst the crew as they're all looking uneasily at each other. Super good. Love that.
Very,
that was
very
great
good.
Stuff.
Very good. Yeah.
It
was a very tense scene. I actually give kudos because
tense.
It was kind of like, you know, it could have turned very goofy very quickly, but it didn't. And I think it's because the guest star owned it and the crew, you know, the cast of the crew acted accordingly. The only funny part was Kirk kicking the phaser.
Yeah, that was funny.
But again, at the distance you're at, I mean, I guess what else you gonna do? Which, kudos for the kick. That's a pretty high kick for a man in his 30s to do.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, the great performance from the guest star. The way he's contorting his body, real good stuff. I've got notes here that he says, "Well, that's suspicious." I was sure this episode was going to be about prisoner ethics. I've got that note. The Kirk's speech about the penal colonies seems to be and this is sort of where I started to kind of maybe change what the episode was about, but his speech seems to be some sort of commentary on psychiatric hospitals, which I'm not sure how prevalent because now they don't exist, but
in the 1960s, these were, I'm not going to say commonplace, but this was during kind of, which is really funny because I got a hankering to rewatch Mad Men, and this is part of the time where sort of like the Freudian ideas became a lot more mainstream. Like this isn't where they originated, but they kind of became in vogue if I'm remembering correctly. So there was
Okay.
sort of an expansion of psychiatry, not so much, and not really as a novelty, but there was a real
Oh,
expansion of I'm not even going to say mental health because a lot of this shit was crazy. But there were in the 50s and 60s, there were, asylums and what would you call that? Not so much
I mean, when I googled it, it was psychiatric hospital. That
psychiatric
was
hospital. Okay, yeah. So that's yeah, and they're varying degrees, of course, because obviously not all of these were for
yeah,
criminal behavior, but um, the loony bin was a common
yeah,
colloquialism, and this was during a time. This is where the idea of getting therapy slowly started to become destigmatized because prior to the
ah,
1960s, it was really like only crazies. And even, I
yeah,
mean, this was real slow burn because even in the 70s, particularly in your more conservative areas, it was still like, oh, they're getting therapy. What's wrong with them? This would have been somewhat prevalent at the time, and it's pretty obvious that the writers and creators of Star Trek were a little bit more liberal minded. So it was
yeah,
probably, I got the sense that there is very much a compassionate look, and the people that were in patients in this episode were absolutely not being treated right, and they were aware of that. It wasn't incidental to the
yeah.
story.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. Because that will. I have a point later on that ties into that, so that's interesting to hear. And then Kirk is being way too trusting. There's like a ton
Oh,
of red flags. It's driving me crazy. A ton of red flags. Kirk is way too trusting. And then after Kirk tells him that they're gonna come down, and he's just like, "Yeah, just bring like one person." And he's like, "All right, cool. Yeah, one person. I mean, I'm going to investigate you, but one person, fine." That was my other thing. Why didn't Bones go?
yeah, that's well. Bones was staying on the ship to take care of the patient, so that I kind of get.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But
And
I have
then
some.
sorry, go on, son. Oh,
I was
I just
just
had some notes about Helen. But if you
Oh,
got
so
that,
I've got some doctor notes, and then we'll get into Helen. Not
yeah, I
like
got some stuff
Kirk
about
did,
Helen.
but we'll get into Helen. Um, I I really really like the interaction between Kirk and McCoy, and how McCoy is sort of being a check and balance to Kirk's power as the captain, because and they
Mhm.
lay it out in the dialogue. Yes, Kirk can overrule him, but McCoy is obligated to report it in his medical log, to which Kirk will have to answer for. And I
Yeah,
actually really, really liked this.
yeah.
Um,
He's like, I'm gonna do this, but you're gonna have to deal with it. So deal. And he's like, fine, I'll deal with it.
he's like, "Fine, I'll do my job." No,
Which I liked.
Kirk's being a bit too smug here. Bones is just doing his job and being a good doctor, frankly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of red flags that yeah, we'll get to when I get to my overall thoughts at the end. I'll get to it. But yeah,
Yeah,
again, too trusting, too
but now,
trusting.
but now let's get into Helen, because there's actually a lot of information about Helen. So the part of Helen Noel was originally written for Janice Rand. So Rand was supposed to go down to the planet instead of her. However, the producers wanted to avoid showing Kirk becoming involved with her, and Grace Lee Whitney was already on the verge of leaving the show due to personal problems on the set. We mentioned in the last episode that she'd been
Yeah.
sexually assaulted by one of the show's executives at a wrap party. She believes and puts in her book that she was pushed out for speaking up in protest about this. But in this episode, it does kind of make sense, because it didn't make sense for Rand to go down to the planet in Miri. It really didn't make sense for Rand to go down to this planet. There would have been no
No,
reason.
but I had that thought, especially later in the episode. I had the thought that this does feel like it was written for Yeoman Rand. I did have that thought, so it's interesting that you say that because it feels like it.
I mean, it
It absolutely
essentially did.
does.
So I think the plan was to kind of sort of have them on a, not so much a will they won't they, but kind of have them as like an unofficial item. But for
Yeah.
reasons that didn't work out, the character's name is a joke because Kirk meets Helen Noel at a Christmas party,
Uh, that's funny. I totally
which
missed that.
which apparently they still celebrate Christmas in the 23rd century. So nice,
Apparently.
nice.
Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. Oh, he had a very shiny nose. And if you ever saw it, you would even say, it glows.
Number, yeah. When she walks in and she's like, "Oh, you know me." Yeah. Oh, Kirk definitely knows her, and then I just wrote wink, wink. And
I
then
actually
the
loved
next note
his
is,
face. I loved
yeah,
his face when she walked in. I was like, Kirk, my man. Like,
And then
how
I was
many?
sure that they had done it, so I just wrote Kirk, or in the science lab,
Oh,
Kirk, you dog.
they absolutely did. I was like, Kirk, how many women on your ship you kissing, bro?
Right?
Like,
He's
I
a real
know it's
dog
the
of a bloke.
'60s. I know it's the '60s, but stop dipping your pen in the company ink, my man.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be some sort of rule against it.
They have pleasure planets.
Just saying.
Just go there. Oh, actually, it's probably a good thing Kirk didn't have hollow suites because he'd probably just be in there all the time. It's like, Captain, we're being attacked by Klingons. Be out in a minute.
I'm busy. Fuck, do it for
Oh,
me.
right there, just like that. Hit me harder. But yeah, Kirk's really unlikable in this episode, especially at the beginning, because he is just so smug, and all McCoy is trying to do is say, "Hey, I think there's something wrong here, and I just think
I
we
mean,
should look into this."
his assistant came up and was all fucky in the brain. Like that's should be an immediate red flag. I
Well,
don't care how trusting you are.
the other red flag is, first of all, they didn't tell him there was a patient missing. They told them it was a patient missing, completely ignoring
Yeah,
or not mentioning the fact that it was actually a doctor.
yeah.
And then it's like every time there's a convenient excuse for why
Oh yeah.
something's going on, and it's just kind of so many red flags, so many red
So many.
flags. Well, Tantalus sure didn't advise Kirk accordingly, but we're going to advise you about a fantastic sponsor right now.
CDZ Collegia Musica is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It is a kind of school of music, a concert series, and an agency that promotes the musicians, dedicated artists, and educators who we feature as our performers. The goal of the Collegium is to bring community together through music performance. These performances vary in musical style from classical to jazz, and music from different parts of the world, from India to the Middle East, that'd be like Persia, and Japan, and China. The goal is to also educate us to how music functions, not so much as a musical universal language, because there are differences in the way that these languages of music are expressed, but to educate us to be able to be more appreciative, not only of the music, but the culture it represents. And by doing this, it brings community together.
So Kirk and Helen beam down to the planet, and Adams introduces them to a strangely emotionless therapist while touring the facility named Lethe, and gives Kirk and Noel a tour of the colony. Although he is affable and accommodating, his staff, like Lethe, all seem lacking in affect. No shit, Sherlock. I'm sorry, but when everybody's going around looking like this,
Yeah, well, I mean, okay. Let's get to what the procedure is first, and then we'll talk about the staff because they've had a particular real world procedure done to them in effect.
so before we get into that, though, I had to nerd out on the word Lethe. The word Lethe comes from Greek, the word Lethe, meaning forgetfulness. In Greek mythology, Lethe is a river in the underworld that causes those who drink from it to forget their past. The river's location is described differently from different sources, but some say it flows through the fields of Asphodel or the Elysium fields. Lethe is also the name of the daughter of Eris, who personifies oblivion and forgetfulness. Lethe is also referenced in the original graphic novel of The Crow, from a Milton quote, which is Lethe, the river of oblivion, rolls his watery labyrinth, which whoso drinks forgets both joy and grief. Which really, in the context of what's happening when this is brought up in The Crow, I mean, it doesn't really make sense.
It's been so long since I've seen The Crow. I don't remember it much.
Oh no, this is in the graphic novel. It's not in the.
I've never
movie.
read the graphic novel.
You should. It's quite good. But yeah, knowing what the quote is now, I'm kind of like, I think James O'Barr just wanted to sound smart by quoting Milton
Probably.
because it really doesn't make that much sense. Like, I mean, if you really stretch it mentally, it makes sense. But because I mean, he's about to kill somebody, so I guess. But
Yeah.
anyway,
I mean, oblivion can be short for, I guess, death, I guess.
yeah, but the quote is referring to somebody forgetting, so it's whatever. It's whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, we got to go down the South Park rabbit hole because it's funny because we were just talking about this a couple episodes ago, and I didn't realize that this was that episode until immediately when I started watching it. I was like, oh, this is the episode that Star Trek parodies. But
That's so funny. I didn't even pick up on that.
but even down to the "I love my work."
I love my work.
I love my work.
That's so funny. Yeah, to be fair, I don't remember much of early South Park. There's just so much of it that I completely forgot about that. That's so funny.
Well, if you've seen this episode of Star Trek and you watch, it's in season 2, and the episode is titled "Roger Ebert Should Lay Off the Fatty Foods."
Yes.
It is and it actually has one of my favorite South Park jokes, which I thought was a reference to something. It's not. They just thought it would be fun to say Plane-arium.
My name is Dr. Adams. Welcome to the Plane-arium.
I thought it was planetarium.
Well, it is, but I have a bone disease which impedes my ability to pronounce the T in Plane-arium. That's a pretty weird bone disease. Yes.
Planetarium.
But there's no T. It's Plane-arium. Which I said in the past episode we were talking about it. That inspired my usage of the pronunciation aquarium just to annoy people. It's not wrong. Just
Not
atypical.
wrong. Exactly. Not wrong.
But every time I say the word planetarium, I'll do that just to gauge if somebody is my kind of. It was like, oh, would you like to go to the planetarium? But yeah, it's a dead ripoff. But it's a great parody episode. It's very, very funny.
That is funny.
Adams shows Kirk and Noel the treatment device he referred to as a neural neutralizer. He referred to as a neural neutralizer. He claims the machine, harmless at low intensity, is used only to calm agitated inmates, but they have sedatives.
Yeah.
So why would this be necessary? This is red flag number 1,000. Noelle is satisfied. Another red flag. The professional psychiatrist sees nothing wrong with this. Whatever.
She just instantly aligned this episode. Just like, you should just trust him.
Yeah. But Noelle is satisfied with this explanation, but Kirk remains suspicious for the first time in this episode. He's not suspicious at all in the beginning, but as he goes down there and sees what appears to be a well-oiled machine, he starts to go,
Yeah, right? It's just running too well.
Yeah, it's a little too good. He's like, there's no chaos here. This isn't run anything like the Enterprise. I must investigate. So I actually said this should be a giant red flag. Use of experimental procedures on non-consenting patients is so unbelievably unethical and immoral on so many levels. This dude has more red flags than a Communist Party parade.
I mean, yeah. Crimson. The flags are crimson.
They might as well be bleeding.
Crimson flags, right?
And then Kirk makes what might have been the dumbest singular decision, because trust me, they build on the bad decisions build on themselves, but this one might have been the most singularly stupid of why would you spend the night there?
Yeah, I don't understand, especially because they're like someone is like, why? I know the guy's like, no, don't do that. But also, I don't think they actually get to the sleeping part anyway, because all these stuff happens during the night.
Okay, so I guess if you want to logic, Kirk probably planned on poking around.
Yeah, he wanted to further investigate that's what led him to testing the machine, because he knew that if the doctor showed him the machine, he wasn't going to get the full picture of what it did.
Fair enough. Yeah, so that would be the logic why. Turns out, I suppose it works out in the end with a lot of luck. With a lot of luck. On the Enterprise, Van Gelder frantically warns that the landing party is in danger. But when he tries to explain the danger, he is convulsed with pain. Spock mind melds with Van Gelder to enable him to tell his story. So this is the first on-screen appearance of the Vulcan mind meld.
So in regards to the procedure itself, so they're lobotomizing them. The lobotomy.
No, it's not exactly the same because what a lobotomy is it actually damages the brain to the point of memory erasure, if I'm not mistaken. This is more like hypnosis.
Okay, so then I have another comparison. Maybe, or the Clockwork Orange procedure.
It's more like, well, yeah, I guess it's more akin to the Clockwork Orange procedure.
That's why. Yeah, okay, and then yeah, obviously it's a Vulcan mind meld. And then Michael, I had a question because is this the first time that they've specifically referred to Spock as a Vulcan, or has he been called a Vulcan prior to this?
No, he's been referred to as a Vulcan before.
Has he? Okay, I wasn't sure
Yep.
if it was like they just called him an alien, or if they had
No,
specifically
no,
called him a
it's
Vulcan
Vulcan
yet.
because Harry Mudd calls him Vulcanian. But
Oh, okay, okay.
and I think a couple of other times they have expressly said Vulcan, but oh
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because in the what episode was it? The Man Trap when Uhura's trying to flirt with Spock, and
Right.
he says Vulcan has no moon.
Right. And then the overall comment on the Vulcan mind meld scene is that it's good but oddly sexual.
Well, I mean, you are probing into somebody's mind. I mean,
I always think it's funny. I'd heard this is another one of those like me newbie cultural osmosis moments where I was familiar with the Vulcan mind meld. I always thought of it as more of like a psychic thing. Oh yeah, you're right. Because in the episode, the South Park episode, Mackie mind melds with the kid.
that's right. I forgot about that.
He totally mind melds with the kid.
I forgot about that. That's
Holy
so
shit!
funny.
Oh my god, that just came back to me. But
God,
yeah.
No, oh
I
my
thought it was
God.
more of a psychic thing, like he was like or telepathic thing, but it doesn't seem to be.
I really, really want to look up the dialogue in that scene, but do it as Mr. Mac now. It's like, "Okay, just calm, relax your mind, okay? One mind,
Oh my. Yeah, that's pretty
danger."
much what it's like. My favorite bit was not so much when he started to do it, but when he got towards the end, he started to go and he started to like move down the guy's face like sensually, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this wasn't sexual, and then it became
It
sexual.
became
I don't even.
very.
I'm like, are
Well,
all Vulcan mind melds like this, or does he have to
no.
buy him dinner first?
No, they unfortunately there does eventually get to a more standardization. Like there are certain nerve points on the face that a Vulcan must sort of like connect with.
Interesting.
As of
It
right
looks like
now,
it was
it's not really.
It looks like it was the first time he had kind of not. I just don't mean it, like it just kind of. Well, okay, from an external point, it looks like they just kind of let Leonard Nimoy do whatever. Like he just kind of improv the movements in the moment. But like from like in universe, it seemed the scene read as though it was the first time he had actually done that to a human. At least that's how I
Yeah,
read it.
it read it, and I actually looked back. Was this chronologically the first time a Vulcan mind melded with a human? It's not, but that was technically it was earlier in the Star Trek timeline, but later in terms of television productions.
Yeah,
So this is the first on-screen mind meld we see, but it had happened at least a few times before between a Vulcan and a human, and certainly a Vulcan and other species. If nothing else, in Star Trek Enterprise, T'Pol does a mind meld with a human, and I was correct. I looked that up. So,
interesting.
but
More, I
it's
guess I meant
mentioned.
like Spock. This is like the first time Spock had ever sort of the character himself is sort of mind melded with anyone. Really, it kind of seemed like maybe like this was because he still seemed kind of new at it. Again,
So if
I know that's because Leonard Nimoy is still figuring out
yeah,
the mechanic,
um,
but that's
in universe, I think this was the first time Spock and mind melded with a human. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, which we'll get an answer on this later. I think part of the ritual of um, pair bonding with his engagement when he was a child was that there's a type of mind meld, maybe
gotcha,
if I remember correctly. So, um,
gotcha.
yeah, I cannot remember though, but
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was like, I mean, every time I see like a classic, iconic Star Trek thing, I get excited. So I got really excited when when it was like the Vulcan mind meld.
it is quite exciting. Yeah. So through the mind meld, Spock learns that the neural neutralizer can empty a mind of thoughts, leaving only an unbearable feeling of loneliness, and that Adams has been using it on inmates and staff to gain total control of their minds. Spock assembles a security team, but the colony's force field blocks transport and communication. In the meantime, while all this is going on, Kirk decides to secretly test the neutralizer on himself with Noelle at the controls. Okay, no, I changed my mind. This might have been the worst mistake he made.
I mean, well, okay, yes and no. I understand it. I theoretically understand you want to understand what the machine does, and the doctor does kind of make a point earlier about it not being ethical to like test it. So he wasn't going to test it on her. And
I
the
agree.
doctor wasn't going to. So like him testing it on himself in and of itself isn't necessarily dumb. He kind of pushes it a little too far though. Like the first test should have been enough to be like, yeah, this thing fucks with your brain.
Yeah, but I did write. I just wrote, this is incredibly stupid on so many levels. Like, this is...
It's not incredibly well thought out, no. But I do have a note about this. This says this woman's inner conflict is wanting to remain professional while also wanting to bang Captain Kirk.
I didn't see too much conflict there because my note was Dr. Noelle using a mind control machine to make Kirk have feelings for her is a little too 1960s for me.
Well, her
like,
concern for her reputation, that for me, I'm like, that is peak 1960s. She's like, I don't want to be known as a girl who sleeps with a guy on the first date. I'm like, oh yeah, that's peak. That's a peak.
I mean, yeah, but that makes sense to a certain extent. But her being like, it felt very 1960s fantasy to me, where she's like, "Oh, I have a mind control device. I'm going to make him fall in love with me." Even though, like, never mind the being a psychiatrist and the ethical problems with this.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
You know,
I mean, I almost. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, never mind all that. He might marry me.
Right. Well, my thing is just like, obviously, I would. Of course, William Shatner needed to make out with the hot brunette, so of course they kiss. Of course, like there's so many like times where these female guest stars show up, and I'm like, you think Shatner, there's no way he didn't, right?
I think he tried. Just wait till we get to Space Lady Gaga.
I'm all right. Those are 3 words I never thought I'd hear together.
Oh, it looks just like her, man. It's uncanny.
That's hilarious.
It's quite funny. Kirk punches her after he kisses her.
And it's funny. A lot of time. Okay, this is the first time in a while this has happened where I don't remember why I wrote this, but I've just got a note that says after, because of course they kiss. Of not really sure what that was, so I don't know what that's in reference to. I genuinely don't.
I mean, that might have been one of the moments where because like there's periods where she's being pretty professional and pretty serious, and then I don't know where she's like, "Remember the Christmas party? No, we can't." And it's just like, lady.
Well, when she was talking about the Christmas party, she was like, "No, you were professional, and you just did a professional. I'm your boss dance." And I wanted more, and I was like, "All right, then."
But it's implied that they, again,
in the science lab, she's like, you and me in the science lab. I'm like, in the science lab, Kirk?
Well,
you didn't even take her back to your quarters? Come on, man.
I mean, at least
it was gentleman in you.
At least it was sanitary.
Was it though?
Do you think it was in Sulu's botany lab?
I really hope it was. I don't know why. I want him to be like, it's about dominance. He needed Sulu to know. That's what it was about.
Sulu walks in. Sulu walks in and goes, "Oh my!" And Kirk just,
"This is my botany lab.
This is my shit.
It's my shit."
Poor little puppet flower just goes.
Oh, I'm the worst.
Do you think so? Like now, I'm just imagining a universe where Sulu's the only one that knows.
No, my thing is no Sulu. No, it was a science lab. Sulu walked in on them, and it became the botany lab. That's why he has a botany lab.
That's how he got his botany lab.
He needs his palms thoroughly greased to keep quiet.
We just solved the mystery.
Because Kirk's got a vibe this episode, which he walks in of like so many funny moments, like sitcom reactions from Spock walking in on Kirk being like, mm-hmm.
This episode,
it's so funny.
Somebody should re-edit this episode with like audience sounds.
Yeah,
like
you absolutely could with like a laugh track.
Coordinates locked in, sir. Ready to beam down.
Dr. Helen Noel, Captain. We've met?
Real quick before we jump ahead in the story, I just had to go pushing forward because we're in their room, right? That's the next bit where they're in the bedroom, or is that not happening?
Yes, you're in Kirk's quarters technically.
Yeah,
That's before they. Oh, well, they go back and forth, but anyway, just.
Well, my question is, did air conditioning exist in the 1960s? This is me dumb question. I actually didn't know.
No, I think it did. Hang on, we can verify this. I don't think Central Air did, but
because when he's like air conditioning vent, I was like, hey, have those in the night, or is that a future thing for them? It's not a future thing for me, obviously, but when she's like crawling through vents, I'm like, hey, have those in the 60s?
Wow, did you? Okay, this is interesting. Did you know that air conditioning dates back? So yes, it looks like they did. So it used to be just architecture that was the oldest example of this that we know is the city of Hamilcar in modern day Syria. But in terms of, okay, let's get into modern here. Okay, first devices. The first air conditioning system was installed in 1902.
Really?
Yeah.
No shit.
So yeah, this goes back a ways. Now, certainly in a commercial sense, I think like central air in homes would come later. But let's see here.
All right then.
Well, let's see.
That felt like a thing where I was like, oh, it's gonna be way older than I think.
Okay, so here we go. In 1945, Robert Sherman of Lynn, Massachusetts, invented a portable in-window air conditioner. The first inverter air conditioners were released in 1980, 1989. So this would have been like a commercial. They would have had an idea of air conditioning in a commercial sense at the very least. So yes, a large event like that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay then. Yeah, I had it. That felt like one of those things when I wrote it down where I'm like, yeah, it's gonna turn out to be way older than I'm expecting.
That's a good question, though. That's a thing that we don't think about today because it's so ubiquitous. But
no, I find like when watching older shit, there's certain moments where like, oh, was that a thing back then? And yeah, it's always fun to be like again. Escalators in the 1930s will always be my go-to. Of like that blew my fucking mind.
Noelle finds that she can easily implant thoughts into Kirk's mind, even altering his memory of a recent Christmas party encounter between the two of them. Dr. Adams appears, however, overpowering Noelle, seizing the controls and increasing the neutralizer's intensity. For some reason, he proceeds to convince Kirk that he's been madly in love with Noelle for years.
Kirk and Noelle figure that out.
Yeah, Kirk and Noelle are then confined to quarters. So it's like, does this dude just like watch people have sex?
Well, and then later on, he uses it to be like, give me your phaser and your.
Well, and see, that part makes sense. That makes sense, but
not so much because when Kirk first got there, he was like, "Do you want my communicator and my blaster as a show of good faith?" And he's like, "Nah, you can keep your blaster." And he's like, "I know that it's normally like procedure to give you my blaster." He's like, "Nah, it's fine. Don't even worry about it." So then why did he do that just like half a day later? Be like, "No, I actually want that blaster. Give me the blaster." Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Also, what did he want? What was the end goal? Like, I don't think he ever says what his end goal here is.
So this goes back to sort of a trend in not just the 60s, but just older villains in general who are just kind of evil for the sake of being evil. Like there's no real good reason.
Character.
Yeah, it's like there's no real good reason for it. It's just kind of like he just likes being bad, which I mean, I guess fair enough, but it just feels like it's coming out of nowhere.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts, but they're all like overarching thoughts, so we'll get to it at the end. But yes, I have thoughts about him in particular.
Well, the Doctor's motivations may have come out of nowhere, but this sponsorship ad didn't. So before I went to the ad, I forgot to mention this, but you mentioned Kirk being coerced to give up his phaser and communicator. I'm watching the scene happen, though, and Kirk is about to drop, but then he opens his communicator as if to try to send a message. And I'm like, the communicator doesn't work because the force field is up. He should not be able to contact the ship.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, I mean, he just kind of is like treatment time now, and he just kind of goes with them. I don't really understand the front half of this episode was intriguing. I was interested. The payoff's just not there for me on this.
But it has to happen for the plot, and because Kirk could fight those two guys off for sure. I mean,
we saw some. Oh, that's what because I had Kirk Few, FEW, and I couldn't figure out what that note was. I meant to write Kirk Fu.
Kirk Fu. Yeah,
there's some Kirk Fu in there.
He could chop the doctor, drop kick the other guy, and then roll down the hallway and get away. Like, this would have been nothing for this. No big deal for Captain Kirk.
Right? He could have fought those guys off. He has enough judo skills.
Yeah,
but he doesn't.
He doesn't. But I was very annoyed by the fact that he was able to use his communicator, because I'm like, no, you established. You established that he couldn't do it. They don't just arbitrarily turn the force field off at night.
No, that is absolutely true. Well, that was a note I had earlier in the episode when Kirk was like, when the guy's like, it's not letting me transport the shit, and Kirk's like, yeah, it's a penal colony, man. Obviously, you can't just errantly transport shit down there.
Yes, because they go out of their
that makes sense when you say it like that.
And they go out of their way multiple times, starting with that, to make sure the viewer understands that there is a force field that prevents transporting and communication, and it has to be lower.
Also, the argument could be, no, I guess not. Because I was going to say Kirk is in distress. He's not thinking clearly, but that's kind of his fucking job. So,
but it functions.
You know what?
It's one thing to go to open it, but it actually, there's communication established. So that's what bothers me, is the fact that, okay, I guess we just forgot about the force field.
No, but when he initially got there, doesn't he check the communicator to communicate to Spock? He's like, yeah, Spock, I'm here. And the guy's like, you can communicate with your ship. So the communicator does communicate to the ship, though.
I know, but he had to turn the force field off first.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. They go out of their way to make sure you understand multiple times that the force field has to be down. But
wait, was this when he went to communicate? Was that when he did the like Spock to Enterprise and he was like freaking out and he did that weird like soliloquy or whatever? Like when he was like Spock to Enterprise. Like that's when he had that moment.
I don't know.
He was making a weird face and he was being weird. I don't know how else to describe what he was doing when he was.
You just reminded me of Gold Dust when they did in WWF when they did the angle where he got Tourette's from being electrocuted.
You are worried.
Let me guess. This was in the 90s.
It was hardcore.
Yeah.
He's just out there cutting promos, going randomly.
That sounds very much like a.
Oh God, it was so stupid. He's like, right in the cockles.
God.
Yeah, it's bad, but it's funny. On Kirk's orders, Noel enters the facility's power plant through a ventilation duct and interrupts Kirk's next neutralizer session by shutting off power to the entire complex. Freed from the machine, Kirk attacks Adams because he didn't do it before for some reason, leaving him alone and unconscious in the treatment room. A guard discovers Noel's sabotage. They fight and she kicks him into the electrical circuitry, killing him. With the force field...
Oh shit, she killed that guy, lit him up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah, he did. It's kind of like the scene in Home Alone when Marv gets... It's not far off from that.
More lethal.
With the force field now off, Spock beams down to the planet, disables the force field, and restores power to the colony. This reactivates the neural neutralizer. God, I can't say that. Which empties Adam's mind completely.
Yeah, my favorite moment was when Spock lands, he's just kind of flipping switches.
Yeah,
he's like, should figure out what the switches do before you just kind of randomly flip them.
See, that's the thing. Theoretically, though, so it's kind of like. At least in the West, like our housing here, like we all know what a light switch looks like. A breaker box is generally speaking the same. There might be, kind of standardization, one would think, within the Federation. Like a big red lever, it probably means power. Yeah, so I don't know. But yeah, Spock comes down there and knows exactly what to do.
Right?
I'd love to see a moment where Spock just comes down and doesn't understand what the shit is, and he's trying to figure it out, and then he just gets frustrated, but like in a very Vulcan way.
Yeah, that would, yeah. But I don't know. I enjoy it. Just his calm, like solves the problem instantly. I just kind of enjoy that.
Adams does get just desserts, though. He deserved it.
Well, yeah, kind of. Kind of. He did kind of devolve to just being generically evil by the end of this.
Yeah.
Which was disappointing.
You could make the argument that nobody deserves it, but I mean, if anybody deserves it, it's the guy who's been
mean-
doing it to other people.
Yeah, the lack of the the guy, certainly against their will.
Yeah, certainly. It's one thing. See, I actually don't have a problem with experimental treatments so long as the people are consenting to being part of said experimental treatment.
Exactly. I tend to agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah,
as long as they're aware of what they're getting themselves into and they consent. Consent important. I feel like that's a final
Consent's big.
frontier.
Yeah, that's the theme of the Final Frontier is like consent is definitely
important.
it's definitely not in this episode. Like it's not there.
No.
Even Kirk is kind of like, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. Kirk, I don't think Kirk is so much sexually harassed in this episode.
A little bit.
A little.
A little bit.
I do like the kind of dig who's like, Bones, this doctor better check out in every single way.
Yeah. I did enjoy that where it's like, oh, I'm sure she will. Oh, I'm sure she will. There was some we've talked about the CGI replacements, but towards the end there was some model work. There were some exterior shots of the Enterprise that would look like legit model work. So I was like, that as impressive.
Yeah, so it looked like the background was probably augmented with CGI, which actually we had some of our first comments on an episode a couple nights ago. A very intelligent gentleman was not so much criticizing, but he was elaborating on some of the things we talked about more in depth. And actually, we have a "What did we fuck up?" segment at the end where he called me out and he was 100% right. But he was talking about, and this makes sense. A lot of the model work in early Star Trek was apparently hot garbage, and Paramount Plus felt that they could do a better job, which the backgrounds are a lot more detailed. They're a lot more dynamic. So I get it to a certain extent. But he does, he does.
My response to that would be I subscribe to a warts and all philosophy when it comes to my media. So like I want to see the shitty but also having a secondary option is also nice. So I do get it.
I'm just saying it would be kind of nice if you had the option to watch the original,
What I'm saying.
But how far does that?
To see the strings on like my gods. I love like I way far aside, but I talked about Godzilla on here, and I love like an early Ultraman where like one of the monsters is just Godzilla in a costume. Like I love I love care like it gives this stuff. But again, I see both sides of the argument. I'm not gonna say I don't.
Well, then on the flip side of that though is how far do you take it? Because I mean, obviously the footage has been updated to HD. So
yeah,
how far do you take that logic, right?
Yeah.
So I guess to each their own. But I will say this: it's never been so blatant that it takes away from
that. I'll give you
the energy of the episode. So yeah, I'll give you that. So back on the Enterprise, Kirk is informed that Van Gelder has destroyed the Van Gelder. I think I'm actually going to keep in every time that I mispronounce it just to have a run
neural
again.
network.
Kirk is informed that Van Gelder has destroyed the neural neutralizer. McCoy is surprised that loneliness could be lethal, but Kirk, after his experience, is not.
Yeah, the perspective that loneliness can't be lethal is, that you could tell that's a product of its time.
Which, especially coming from Bones, that seems really odd.
Yeah.
That Bones would think that.
So, ultimately, I was disappointed with the ending of this episode. Because I was kind of hoping that the argument was going to be like, oh, I knew that the reveal was he was using a machine to fuck with people's brains. Like, that was immediately apparent to me. But I thought that the argument was going to be for, like, I don't know, there's a name for this type of philosophy, but the idea of, like, you take a bad person and, like, you can make them a good person, but is that ethical? Like, to change the nature of who like there's no argument for the ethics of what he did to those people. Like, there was no argument that the machine itself was bad, just that he was bad in the way that he was using it. And I would have kind of wanted a more nuanced take of, like, he's not a bad guy and he ultimately is doing what he thinks is right for these people. And then the argument would have been from Spock, maybe why, or from Kirk, why, or from Bones, why doing this to people is immoral. And then from Spock of like, well, no, it's logical because they're no longer violent. If you take to go back to because Spock, we mentioned it earlier, even brought up the idea that without emotion, there's no crime. So like, it's just, there was no argument for the machine. and I kind of wish there had been, because I think it would have made this
Yeah, it would have
the
it would have
episode
made
more
the
interesting.
yeah, I agree. It would have made the debate more dynamic, although I would lean to the side of it being immoral. But yeah, there's a
Oh, me too, definitely. But I'm just saying, like, I like you like look at my favorite Superman quote is like, when you kill a person for being evil, you deny them the opportunity to be good. Like, when you change the fabric of a person's personality, you deny them the opportunity for character growth, right? And so
well, yeah,
I
and that I mean
ultimately,
that's you brought up A Clockwork Orange. That's basically the point.
yeah, pretty much,
At
yeah,
a very, very basic level, that's the point that the movie is making, is
exactly,
that,
yeah.
you
I
know,
actually don't
like
like La Clockwork Orange, but yeah, I get, yeah. I think the messaging is muddled in that movie
it really is
for
because
similar reason.
well, it kind of glorifies the violence in a way, but then at the same time, it makes a case for not going through the treatment, which I agree with in a vacuum, because
Yeah,
I come down on the side of like altering someone's brain is immoral, but
yeah, same.
you know,
But
you
this
know,
episode doesn't make that point. It doesn't make the point
exactly.
that it makes the point that he's evil, but not that his actions are evil. And
You
yeah,
could make the point that the machine existing is not inherently evil because if somebody consented to the procedure, like say somebody just had these violent impulses that they couldn't control and they wanted to have them,
sure.
purged,
How I would
that's
resolve that is when Kirk is testing the machine, maybe implant, again, criticizing it however your old show, but maybe implant a good idea in his brain to show the positive benefits of the machine. Like, I don't know. The show is so insistent on making Kirk perfect, but
well,
like
so
pick a flaw
yeah,
where
well, so
he's
like
like,
for example, so like in a real world application where everybody would jump on this. So the biggest reason a lot of people don't work out or exercise or eat right is lack of motivation, right?
yeah.
So strap them to that chair willingly, consentingly, and just be like reprogramming their brain so that like exercise makes you happy.
Or
You
I
know?
mean, my brain goes to addiction. Like,
Yeah,
that
well
would be so
that
useful.
that's a much better example. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they refer to it as rehab in the episode, but yeah, to be like a heroin addict who doesn't want to be addicted to heroin, that's a positive use for that machine, right? And I just, yeah, I kind of wish there was, like, again, there's no. I thought that that's what this was going to be, about the ethics of experimenting on prisoners and changing the fabric of their personality, and it was just kind of, yeah, just kind of devolved to, he's kind of vaguely evil,
Well, because
and
like wouldn't this
I
episode
think
have been a much
this
more
shows. Sorry.
oh go ahead, you had a thought.
I was just gonna say, this show is better than that. I guess there have been more interesting villains at this point. I guess or is more nuanced than this. I guess maybe thus
Well,
far it has been anyway.
wouldn't this be interesting? And this could point to the debate between Spock and McCoy. Is let's say the good. This might not be a Star Trek, but you could do this in a number of shows. Let's say the good doctor was in fact using this machine on people against their will, but when they come out of it, because their brain's been reprogrammed, they're actually happy about it.
Yeah,
But then you make the case of okay, but is that just a byproduct of the machine, right?
one of
And
the assistants could have been that.
yeah. Yeah. And Spock could have been making the argument that like, well, they're no longer violent. They say they're happier and Bones could be like, but you have altered their brain
Exactly.
against their will initially. So what you see now is it might just be a byproduct of the procedure. There's no way
And
to
I mean,
tell.
my thing is, I always love, as I've gotten older, I love me some Shades of Grey.
Hmm.
Not the 50 variety, but I do enjoy me some Shades of Grey. So like, I would have like maybe had it where the doctor started off not doing it against people's will, and it
Right.
was a slippery slope to, like, he thinks he's doing the right thing for these prisoners, but he's not. More, it would have benefited from more prisoners, but again, television, so you only have so much room in the budget for guest stars. But there was a lot of, like, crew that could have been prisoners, I think. And yeah, I just, nuance. Like, I always love nuance in these discussions, and
Hmm.
I'm enjoying the build up. The mystery was really good.
It
I just
was.
I the slow burn. I'm really enjoying, like, because I'm a real big fan of procedurals, so
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying the procedural nature of it. Sets up the mystery and it paid. I just didn't think the payoff was there for me this time.
Well, and
But
the other thing
I
you
did
have to
enjoy
remember
environmental aspect though.
right, right. But the other thing you have to remember about Star Trek, the original series, is a lot of these things are cliches now, but many of these story elements were seen for the first time in this show. Like, I'm not saying this the first time there was a medical mystery or anything like that,
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact that the fact that South Park parodied this specific episode.
Oh yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, yeah. I always give thing leeway for that. I try
yeah,
to anyway. When I'm
yeah,
like, I don't like to be like this. Yeah, like I say that 1964. I know better than that in 2024 with however many years of hindsight. Like that's not fair. They didn't have that.
not at all. I just had written down that Kirk really needs to apologize to Bones.
Little bit. Yeah, he really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the ending does end on that weird, again, him just looking off into the middle distance with that really dumb grin on his face, like, yeah, I did it. I did this one. Kirk is the best. I'm the best. Kirk is awesome.
Would have been really funny as if at the end of it he just looks over and goes, "Oh, by the way, Bones, Merry Christmas."
No, it would have been even funnier if the only appearance of Sulu was like, hey, in the science lab. But so,
Oh, by the way,
so did the programming wear off? That's the other thing they don't resolve. Is he still in love with her?
I don't know. Like, yeah, that's a good point. Would you like a fun fact?
I mean, always. Love my
So,
facts fun.
in an episode of Deep Space Nine in 1993, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there's a shipping label on a piece of cargo that shows that a Dr. Van Gelder is still in charge of the Tantalus penal colony in the 2370s. He is more
Huh.
likely to be the son or grandson of the original Dr. Van Gelder, as the original would have to be at least 153 years old by the time of Deep Space Nine. But fun fact,
Wow.
little Easter egg.
That's interesting. So this machine never comes back.
Apparently not, at least not in this same capacity.
Huh.
No, I
Surprising
don't think in the same way. Yeah, I know. At least not in Star Trek. You would think it would. We'll
because
see.
it's such a great device for like the bad guy wants an army and like has perfected the procedure and they're all like zombie like.
Well,
like,
I say
it,
that.
it writes itself.
I say that, and I want to say the Cardassians in I think Next Generation use something similar.
Cardassians?
Yeah, not to be confused with the Kardashians.
I was just gonna say that's a coincidence, right?
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay, because I was like, that's a weird coincidence.
Cardassian is spelled with a C.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
just the pronunciation is a weird coincidence.
And before we get to the "What did we fuck up" segment, which I'm just going to read you the comment because he totally calls me out and he's right. Our red shirt tally still stands at 2.
Yeah, I see, every time I thought that I was waiting. I had it ready to write down it when he karate chopped him at the beginning. I was like, oh, I think he's gonna turn out to be dead. They're like, no, he's just unconscious, and I'm like,
Okay, so special shout out to Robert 08010 who watching our oh shoot, which episode was this? I think it was the first one actually. First or second. He said, "Okay, wait, what? Did you just say it's 4:3 so it can't be in HD?" Not so, my good man, not so. You can produce video in 16:9 or 4:3 regardless of the resolution. And he is completely right. I was thinking in the moment, I was thinking about the difference in aspect ratio, so I was misconflating that. He's absolutely right. They did convert for Paramount Plus and DVD releases subsequent. They did enhance the image to HD,
huh,
but they kept the 4:3 format because they didn't want to stretch the image, which you
yeah,
theoretically could do. And that's what was happening with a lot of older properties when they were first being transferred to HD, is they were also
yeah.
stretching to the 16:9, but
I
they
mean,
realized that that looks
to be,
bad.
yeah. Well, to be fair, a lot of standard definition like TV shows, particularly the '80s, like every time I come out and like Jordan will be watching Alf, for example. You see it's in like that standard definition aspect ratio. So when I see a show's in that aspect ratio, I just tend to assume that like it's not HD.
And I did do the same thing, but Robert is correct. And actually, when I read his comment, I felt so stupid. Not in a bad way, but I'm just like, yeah, I don't really know why I said that because I know better. But
Yeah, fair enough.
so, Robert,
You got
we
it.
salute you. And thank you because he left a number of informative comments. He also answered your question about Uhuru's voice, the frame rate conversion.
Oh, that's what makes her sound off.
It can because it was originally
Oh,
shot on film at 24 frames per second, but video is at 29.97. So when
oh,
it was
fascinating.
converted to when it was converted to digital, it would theoretically affect the audio. Do you have any other notes on Dagger of the Mind? My head hurts.
Only that I much preferred this one to last week. At least his love interest was his own age.
Fair enough. Enough said.
I was decidedly less uncomfortable. So
yeah, no, this is just office harassment. This is, I mean,
there were some logical inconsistencies that happened in this, but otherwise, no, I did enjoy this one more than last week.
And at least the woman was into it. So
she was into it. Really, the consent got questionable for Kirk. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I kind of was like, I mean, I don't really feel bad for you, but at the same time, it's kind of like, I'm not sure you're down for this. But anyway, this has been The Final Frontier. Join us next week, again, on The Final Frontier, when we go over the episode, which you're going to know the part I'm talking about, but you're going to laugh very hard towards the end of next week's episode. So join us next week when we tune in for the Corbomite maneuver. Watch long and prosper.
Watch long and prosper.
Darling, are you all right?
Yes. Oh, this isn't right, Captain. Dr. Adams did this to you.
That's kind of the... Oh, God damn it, I'm blue again. Hang on. Why does this happen? Violet, you're turning violet, Violet.
Violet.
Commander Baylock identifies his ship as the Fesarius, the flagship of the First Federation, not to be confused with the Second United Federation of Planets.
And is this the origin of Bones' iconic catchphrase, "I'm not a doctor, I'm a blank"?
Well, listen, he's tired, he has a female yeoman, and they fed him salad.